The Minnesota woman at the center of an Amber Alert is now behind bars, accused of a heinous string of crimes against her own children. We're breaking down the disturbing case with Chad Ayers, a former sheriff's deputy and founder of Proactive Response Group. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey there, everybody. This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Well, Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. So if you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions. Just go to incognitoclaims.com/sidebar. Jennifer Marie Statley. That is a name that unfortunately is going to be embedded in your mind. Why? Because she is facing murder charges for allegedly brutally killing two of her three sons and setting their home on fire before fleeing with the youngest child. According to a federal indictment, the 35-year-old stabbed her sons, who have been identified through public records as Remy and Tristan Statley, who were just 6 and 5 years old, on the Red Lake Indian Reservation out in Minnesota on March 15th. She then took off with her 3-year-old son. A few hours later, as authorities started to piece together what was going on, they put out an Amber Alert for the missing child. Just an hour later, a motorist saw the car, called 911. Todd County deputies stop Statley, and they find this little boy. And this little boy, 3 years old, covered in wounds, showing severe signs of neglect. According to the indictment, Statley allegedly stabbed one of the children in the chest with some sort of knife or other sharp object. The other child also had wounds, but actually died from smoke inhalation after Statley allegedly set their home on fire, left the children inside. Statley was charged with 1 count of premeditated murder, 1 count of murder in the course of committing child abuse, 1 count of murder in the course of committing arson, 1 count of arson, and 1 count of felony child neglect. The indictment says minor C was found with open sores and lesions on his body and rotten teeth in his mouth. The felony child neglect charge accuses Jennifer Marie Statley, an Indian adult who as a parent, legal guardian, or caretaker of minor C, an Indian boy, did willfully deprive minor C of necessary food, clothing, shelter, health care, and supervision appropriate to the child's age, despite being reasonably able to make the necessary provisions therefor, and which deprivation did substantially harm his physical, emotional, and mental health. Now, the indictment here refers to him as minor B, but that appears to be a typo. According to their obituaries, Remy and Tristan shared the same father, attended Red Lake School. A vigil was held in their memory. Statley's attorney told the Associated Press that there is, quote, a firm basis for his client to plead not guilty. Didn't say why. Drew Evans, superintendent of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, said, while tragic, this case shows that Amber Alerts can save lives and catch alleged criminals. He said in a statement, quote, this case is another example of how Amber Alerts save lives. They get critical information out quickly to millions of Minnesotans willing to step up to help rescue a child in mortal danger. We are grateful to the Minnesotan who acted quickly and bravely in this case, and to all Minnesotans who join in the search when a child needs them most. I want to talk about this. Let me bring in friend of the show, Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy, SWAT team member, founder of Proactive Response Group. Chad, good to see you. Unfortunate circumstances that we're talking about here. Let me just get your initial reaction to the case.
Yeah, Jesse, it's a mixture of anger and just pure devastation and sadness. The most innocent that we have in this world. Can you imagine being that child and looking at your mother while this is going on? I cannot fathom it. Obviously, the suspect here has some type of serious mental illness. But, you know, with the malnourishment of the third victim that is still alive, I have a lot of questions. How was this not picked up on, whether in the schools, friends, family, in the community? How did someone not see this? Obviously, I know in the Indian lands and the reservations, it's a very tight-knit community. A lot of times there's a lot of difficulty with tribal police and federal agencies getting information from time to time in that culture. But it's a devastating story to read. And, you know, my heart goes out for these poor little innocent children.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, the jurisdictional component of this happening on an Indian reservation. Does that make the investigation different in a way?
It does. And I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of background on this
Right.
and history on this and how this works, but I do know, especially, I've actually had this, and I can't remember the exact court case. There's one out of Tulsa, Oklahoma right now. I think it's called the McGirt case. And basically what it is people now who have tribal cards aren't able to, be arrested by local authorities if they are on land that has been deemed tribal land. So, in fact, Sean Larkin and I were talking about this a few weeks ago. Is the fact that you can pull someone over, and they have 2 kilos of cocaine in the car. As a local law enforcement officer, you cannot do anything right there. You can notify tribal police, you can notify the feds, but as far as making arrests right there, there's a lot of red tape that goes into
Hmm.
that. Obviously, here in the upstate of South Carolina, we never had to deal with that, but there is a lot more that goes into it.
We'll talk a little bit more about that component in a second. I want you to talk about the Amber Alert. You heard authorities talking about how not only important it is, but I just think if it wasn't issued, what could have happened to this 3-year-old? Talk to me about the Amber Alert.
Amber Alert, probably one of the greatest tools we have for abducted children or people under the age of 18 who have been abducted or we suspect is in, imminent danger for their lives or serious bodily injury. So obviously it's an alert system that goes out. We've all been on, in the car, the gym, the subway, when everyone's phones start going off. And it just puts a broadcast out. You've got to there's a lot of criteria that goes into being able to meet the standard of an Amber Alert going out. But once you meet that standard, obviously, you're going to get alerts on the TV, your cell phones start going off, the marquee boards on the interstate. And so they're going to give information as far as the suspect vehicle. What are we looking for? We're looking, the description of the suspect, the description of the victim. And obviously, in this day and age, there's a lot of great technology out there, license plate readers on the interstate. But it gives the civilians a chance to kind of step up to the plate who are out there on the roads. And it worked. This is how this suspect was caught. Was someone recognized the vehicle from the Amber Alert and notified authorities. So tons. I don't know an exact percentage, but a high percentage of abducted children are located because of Amber Alerts and just situational aware people seeing the vehicle and reporting it to authorities.
By the way, in your experience in your career, have you ever had to deal with these kinds of cases where parents were accused of not only abusing their children, but killing their children like this?
So I wasn't directly involved in one, but there was a large kind of murder suicide where a female was going through a nasty custody battle and snapped and put her 2 kids in the backseat of a vehicle and executed them, and then drove about 10 miles up the road and executed herself. And another example of this goes back to when I was a child, and a lot of people remember is the Susan Smith case here in
Yep.
South Carolina in Union. Susan Smith went down to John D. Long Lake, obviously, put both of her children that were strapped into the car seat and pushed the car down the boat ramp. And she played her story for, at least a week, I remember. But that's one that really hits home here in South Carolina. And I literally, obviously I don't have children, but I cannot imagine. I got nieces and nephews. In fact, my brother just had a baby this morning, but I cannot imagine pushing that car and seeing these
Yep.
children look back and it's disgusting.
It's first of all, congratulations. That's great to
Thank
hear.
you.
These are the toughest cases for me. It's really tough to cover them, to hear about them, and to process them. And so when I hear defense counsel saying, that there's some way that she is not guilty of this, my mind immediately thinks, again, if the allegations are that strong, and the evidence is that strong, that there was not another person in that house that did this, that it could be
Jesse,
a mental health defense. That's the only thing that I can imagine they're going with here.
100%. And obviously you have an extensive, law background and understand this, but for, obviously the federal authorities, ATF, the Bureau, to get involved and to present this indictment on her and arrest her on this. Obviously, the evidence is going to be pretty overwhelming in the situation. There's, what's interesting to me is that not much has been said about the father. Did they live together? I don't know. Was he still in the picture? Were they married, still living together? That's going to be interesting to shed some light. on what he knew about this moving forward.
Yeah, because if again, and we don't know unless somebody else was involved, it just seems to me you'd have to argue some sort of break from reality that you could not appreciate the wrongfulness of what you're doing, because we're talking about you murdering your children and setting a house on fire with their bodies inside, and the abuse that this third child received. Again, just it's hard to process. I did want to ask you though. There's this interaction between the different agencies, and I think that's really interesting. There's a quote I want to read to you. This is from U.S. Attorney Andrew Luger, and I think this is a good way to sum it up, but then want your perspective. It says, this tragic case demonstrates the importance of close working relationships between the U.S. Attorney's Office and our state, federal, and tribal law enforcement partners. Together, we are able to bring charges swiftly in cases such as this on behalf of the most vulnerable among us. And again, that this was a result of an investigation by the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the Todd County Sheriff's Office, the Long Prairie Police Department, and the Red Lake Police Department. That's a lot of agencies working together. Walk me through what that's like.
At the end of the day, you've got to basically humble yourself, right? Everybody is trying to work. Everyone's got a bunch of ideas. But in a situation like this, we have 2 deceased children. We got 1 missing. All that pride goes out the window of jurisdictional. I want to be the main one to do this, and you come together and you work as a team. Obviously, every agency brings a unique part of this, right? The feds have a lot more resources and financial backing. They have access to a lot more technology for tracking and locating people. So again, in situations like this, it is so important to work together as a group team, as the brothers and sisters in blue, to come together to bring this suspect to justice.
Yeah, it's incredible because, again, a life was saved. That 3-year-old was saved. It might not have been the case if this was if she wasn't apprehended sooner. It's a tragedy that the 2 kids weren't saved, but unfortunately, this is the circumstances that we find ourselves in. She is facing federal charges. I looked it up. The murder charge, 18 USC 1111. If you murder a child, or you murder somebody during the course of child abuse, or you murder somebody during the course of an arson, there's also jurisdictional issues where this happened. We're talking first-degree premeditated murder, possible life in prison, possibly the death penalty. And I have to tell you, if she is accused of doing this, I wouldn't be surprised if the death penalty's on the table, Chad. If she really did do this.
No, I fully agree. If she's convicted of this crime or pleads guilty to this crime, I think what you're probably going to run into, Jesse, is if she takes a plea deal. Obviously, I think she'll probably get life without parole. But if she takes this to trial, rolls the dice, and she's found guilty, I can see a death penalty case. You've got to. Let's be honest. You're going to have a mother or a father sitting on that jury if this thing goes to trial, and once more details come out, crime scene photos, stuff like that, I see the hammer dropping quick.
How tough is it for members of law enforcement to respond to these kinds of scenes?
Man, it's so funny you brought that up. I've actually been working with a group to help law enforcement in situations like this. Full transparency here. 2.5 years ago, my fiance, my wife at the time, looked at me and she goes, "You're going to go get help for what you witnessed in your career." And it wasn't like I was battling substance abuse, battling the bottle, anything like that. But what happens is this, I shut people out. I didn't want to talk about, hey, how was your day at work? What'd y'all get into? And I was very quick in my response. It was fine, because I didn't want to share. I buried all that trauma. And what I learned after going through a 2.5-week process is burying trauma in law enforcement. We never had, until recently, there were not a lot of resources out there. Obviously, military transitioning out, there's been a lot of resources, but for law enforcement, not just law enforcement, EMS, fire, first responders, there wasn't a lot out there for us. And what I realized is it wasn't, obviously being on a tactical team, I was involved in several shootings in my career. I realized it wasn't my shootings that bothered me. I'm just, Jesse, me, I'm blunt. You come out shooting at me or my partner, that's just what happens. But what I realized through this process and going through therapy was it was 2 car wrecks where children were in car seats and the car was on fire and I could not get to them. And so there was literally roads in this town that I could not ride down anymore because of that. So There is. I think not just in law enforcement, but like I said, EMS, fire, first responders that on a daily basis are seeing some of the most horrific things, whether it's abused children or horrific car wrecks. Obviously, the children's thing, like we're talking about, really tugs at your heartstrings. But, I encourage men and women who are listening, whether you're first responders or just any type of trauma you've been through in the past, do not bury that. Reach out. There's resources out there for help. But again, you don't want to drag that into your home life. That's a great question,
Chad. That's really well said. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's important that people understand that. I'm so sorry for what you and your fellow brothers in blue have had to witness and endure and see. It's. I wish you didn't. But this is a scary world that we're living in. And, I always say it, but thank you so much for the work that you do. And, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I know that's probably not easy to get back into. I'm just going to leave everybody with this. And I think it's important to realize. So in their obituaries, Tristan was described as an outgoing, spirited little boy who loved playing with his brothers, loved Sonic, and was actually a protector of his brothers. Remy was described as a smart, funny, loving little boy, loved to be with his brothers, loved to play with his brothers. And he also loved Jessie from Toy Story and Molly from Bubble Guppies. It just makes you think how sadistic this was, how dark this is, and how much of a tragedy it really is. And it's, like I said, not easy to cover. But Chad Ayers, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate your perspective and appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, everybody. That is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.